Let's move on to main topic number 2, shall we? And our second main topic today gets submitted to us by S. Beam. And S. Beam writes, I just read from Deadline that I'm sure I'm going to mispronounce this, the Molyneux sisters, writers from Bob's Burgers, will pen the sequel of Deadpool 3. This is good news for Deadpool fans, in my opinion. Glad to see that they are still actively moving forward with this franchise and hasn't been put on the back shelf just to disappear. So, John and Rob, what are your thoughts on the subject? Thanks. All right, thanks a lot for sending that in, man. And yeah, this news came out. Look, we have had no doubt that at some point they were going to start moving on Deadpool. Like, there was really no doubt about it. Back at CinemaCon, which is now almost 2 years ago, that the last CinemaCon we were at, Rob, you know, Alan Horn himself, the high guru of all things movies at Disney, got on stage and talked about Deadpool, talked about the importance of Deadpool. We knew Deadpool was going to move forward at some point, somehow, some way. The question would be how and when, and we've been waiting a long time. And some other big question marks floating in the air about it, like, will it be under the Fox banner or under the Marvel banner? That question got answered a little while ago, that it would be under the Marvel banner to some degree. Would it be rated R? Would it be PG-13 and all this kind of stuff? Well, they've now taken the next major steps forward. This comes to us from the folks at Deadline, who write, as Disney continues to figure out what to do with Fox properties acquired in the merger, one of the biggest IPs, Deadpool, looks to be gaining momentum. Sources tell Deadline that Bob's Burgers veterans Wendy Molyneux and Lizzie Molyneux, and again, apologies if I'm mispronouncing those names, will write Deadpool 3 with Ryan Reynolds set to reprise his role as the wise-cracking Marvel superhero. Now, look, I gotta admit, I don't watch Bob's Burgers. And so, yeah, and which is crazy because my brother-in-law, Ray, who does, you see him in the chat board there sometimes. He does a lot of the graphics here on the show. He loves Bob's Burgers. I mean, he loves that show. And I remember it's a big deal because back when Ann was still working, my wife Ann was still working at Hasbro in the corporate offices, it was a big deal to Ray because Bob's Burger moved in to the same building with Ann, and they moved into like the floor below or something like that. I'm not familiar with it, but I know a lot of people love it, and that's great. The important thing here is that they seem to be moving forward on Deadpool 3. To me, this is no surprise. This was never going to go anywhere. Now, what is also interesting is that the report says it looks like they are going to go R-rated. So they are going to hold on to that R rating, which is key and important. It still doesn't answer the question about where is this thing going to end up? Is this going to be in the MCU? As long as Bob Iger is alive, Rob, I have a hard time believing an R-rated Deadpool will be in the MCU proper. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm certainly not saying it's impossible. But I just have a hard time when you hear all the things Bob Iger has said about this. As long as he is alive and as long as he is the chairman of the board of Disney, I have a very, very hard time believing that they're going to put this in the MCU proper. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But Rob, I'd hate to be a wet blanket, but I cannot talk about this story without talking about something that I find very disappointing. And listen, this is in no way casting any shade or disparity on the Molyneux sisters. Not at all. Like I said, I'm not familiar with their work, so I can't speak ill of their work at all. But Reese and Wernick, Rhett Reese and Paul Wernick, who were the writers of Deadpool 1 and Deadpool 2, worked so closely with Ryan Reynolds, who I've had the privilege of having them in my studio on a couple of occasions, who are such important players. They are such big contributors to the DNA of what these Deadpool movies have been. And early in the days after the Disney merger and in the year or so since, they have been actively talking about, yeah, we've had meetings, we're talking about, and been filling us as the audience in on what's happening with Deadpool 3. They're not writing Deadpool 3? I found that very surprising and disappointing. I'm very disappointed that these guys aren't writing it. Now, again, that's no, insult, no shade at all on the new writers whatsoever. I'm just saying that it's hard to imagine somebody else writing the voice of Deadpool, you know what I mean? And working with Ryan Reynolds on that degree. Now, obviously, Ryan Reynolds was one of the guys who picked the sisters to be the new writers. So clearly Ryan Reynolds is very comfortable with them, and that's great. That's important. So yeah, to me, it's a little bit of a mixed bag. It's great to hear that forward momentum is now happening on Deadpool 3. It's great to hear that it's probably going to end up still being R-rated. All that's good to hear. Just got to admit, I'm a little bit disappointed to hear that Reese and Wernick are not coming back to write it. And I've heard no explanation. I've heard no explanation from Disney, from Ryan Reynolds, from Reese Wernick's own Twitter accounts. I've heard no explanation. Not that they owe us an explanation. I'm just saying it'd be kind of nice. But anyway, Rob, overall, still good news. You heard about this Deadpool momentum now happening. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, I mean, there has been talk that we're going to be getting a Disney Plus section that is either password protected so they can put R-rated movies on Disney Plus. And I figured, okay, if that is true, whatever it's going to be called, that to me means that they can move forward with these other franchises, whether it's Alien, Predator, or Deadpool, because they have a place to put them now on Disney Plus. So that made sense to me. So I think it's great. I think that it's a perfect example of or a perfect way to go. I like that they're doing it. But, in terms of our writers, they're involved in 2 other big projects already. Reese and Wernick are involved with Joseph Kosinski's Spiderhead, which is a new science fiction film, and also Clue. They're doing the remake of Clue.
With Ryan Reynolds.
Yeah, with Ryan Reynolds. So perhaps they just simply were too busy. And I think, there was talk in that article about how Ryan Reynolds met with a bunch of other different writing teams. I wouldn't be surprised if Reese and Wernick come up with a producer credit on the 3rd film and maybe a story by credit, but they just didn't have time to script it. Who knows? But I think it's great. Who doesn't love the Deadpool franchise? I'm glad we're getting a 3rd one. I always think, I don't know, just because I'm a completist, I always think that if there's 2 films in a franchise and the second one made more money than the first one, they need a 3rd one. You need, in the world that we live in, isn't it better when we have trilogies? Don't you like that better? Case of the Saw franchise, just do 10 more.
Just keep it going. Just keep going with them. I mean, obviously, Deadpool, the most successful R-rated films, and they just opened a lot of doors in a lot of different ways. And it's not really narrative focused, so you can just people just want to follow along with Deadpool's adventures and his wackiness. And so I'm glad they're doing it, and let's see if we get more momentum. It's still going to be interesting. Rob, I just got to ask you at this point, because as new information comes out, we can change our positions. Where's your thinking right now at where will they put Deadpool in terms of its relationship to the MCU proper? Do you think they'll have it as its own thing, or do you think they'll actually try to work it into the MCU proper?
Well, that's a really good question, because obviously Deadpool's a mutant. Deadpool came out of the New Mutants comic, and joking about the New Mutants and joking about the X-Men and joking about the entire X universe. I mean, we had characters like Juggernaut in the last one. It's such a part of Deadpool's DNA, and with the X-Men not established in the MCU yet, I wouldn't be surprised if Deadpool turns his sights towards the MCU proper. And we might see some, I would dare say, some pretty cool cameos, in this movie. And I think that they'll move away from the X-Men. I would imagine they'll set their sights to skewer some of our favorite characters in the MCU. That would be my guess.
And the fact that it'll be rated R and they'll be cross-pollinating their PG-13 content with rated R content, and the sensitivity Bob Iger has with protecting the families. And I don't know. What do you think?
I just think like the way that you have that one shot in the last Deadpool when they're in the X mansion and Deadpool looks in a room and all of the X-Men are there. Yeah. I mean, because the irreverent nature of I wouldn't be surprised if there's a joke that Deadpool winds up at Disney Studios and maybe Bob Iger plays himself. And there's some kind of I mean, I could see something like that happening because
That'd be so meta.
it would be, and it's exactly the kind of thing that I would see happening. And I think fans would welcome it because the whole idea, they made the joke, the marketing department made those jokes when Disney bought Fox. You saw Deadpool wearing the mouse ears, they have to do something like that. And I think in a way, for a third movie, if you go big or go home. Like what about Deadpool? He's tired of slumming with the X-Men and all he wants to do is meet the Avengers. That could even be part of the whole film, is that he's joking about how come he didn't come find me?
The heavy hitters.
The heavy hitters. And maybe that's the big climax of the movie. I don't know.
Well, guys, the question is for you. What do you think about the sounds of this? It sounds like Deadpool 3 finally has some momentum. What do you think is ultimately going to happen? It sounds also like they're going to keep it rated R. Will it end up in the MCU proper? Will it not? What do you guys think about this? Jump into the comment section below and let us know your thoughts. All right, guys.